Imagine it is the middle of the night on the 2nd of July, 1187. You are crouched in the dark beside the springs of Sapphira, filling a leather skin from cold, moving water. There is a lot of it. All around you, tens of thousands of men are making camp. Fires burn. Heavy warhorses drink constantly from stone troughs. You tighten the strap on your iron mail, the finest protection Europe can make. In a tent nearby, the leaders of the kingdom are shouting at each other. They are not arguing about water or about the heat. They are arguing about honor and pride, and which of them looks like a coward. A few miles east, an enemy army is choosing its ground near a twin-peaked hill known as the Horns of Hatton. You tie the skin to your saddle. You believe you are riding out to break an army. You have no idea that the gear on your chest, the horse underneath you, and the fortresses you are leaving behind are about to turn on you all at once. So, how did 2 centuries of European survival engineering build an army so invulnerable it could shatter anything on a battlefield, and then lose everything in 2 days on a road it could never leave? The answer starts with a bill, one that nobody in Europe had ever been handed before. Now come back. Look at the room you are sitting in. Maybe you turned a thermostat down earlier. Temperature and clean water are constantly there for you, and you have never had to make a decision about either one. Your biggest water problem today was probably ice, or no ice. Now, strip all of that away. For an army arriving in the 12th century Levant, water was not a surface, not a river network, not a wet European forest. As the historian Ronnie Ellen Bloom has pointed out, water in a Levantine summer was a set of small, separate points on a dry map. One spring here, a deep well there, a cistern cut into a hillside. Between those points, miles of baked rock where the sun does not negotiate. So, how did men from a cold, wet continent live out there for 200 years? They built a chain of fixes: iron, horses, stone, and finally an institution. Every single link worked. Then the whole chain snapped at once. To understand why the trap closed, start with the body. When a person does heavy physical work at 35 degrees Celsius, they lose water dangerously fast. Sweat loss reaches 1.5 to 2 liters an hour. Lose only a few percent of your body mass in fluid, and your thinking slows down. Your reaction time drops. Your strength goes. So you drink. But water has weight. 1 liter of water weighs 1 kilogram. A warhorse working under a desert sun is heavily dependent on it and needs somewhere between 40 and 70 liters every single day just to keep functioning. Sit with that number for a second. To move 3,000 horses across dry ground for 3 days, you would have to carry more than 400,000 kilograms of water. To carry it, you need pack animals. And pack animals drink constantly too. The arithmetic does not close. It cannot close. There is no version of this where you win by packing more carefully. You cannot carry a desert crossing on a horse's back, which means an army does not go where it wants to go. Its reach is set by the distance between the wells. Go dangerously far from water, and the machine stops working, whether or not anybody attacks it. That is the shape of the bill. It arrives constantly. It arrives on days when nothing happens at all. And every man walking out of Sapphira was carrying his share of it on his back. Here is what most people get wrong about medieval armor in the Middle East. The popular version says the iron was a mistake. That knights cooked inside metal that should have stayed in Europe. The record says something else entirely. The armor worked superbly. Chroniclers, describing Frankish infantry on later campaigns, recorded something astonishing. Men walking forward through arrow fire with shafts lodged in their padded coats and their mail. Still walking. Still fighting. Not wounded, not slowed, just carrying somebody else's arrows around with them. Iron mail over a thick padded garment made a man close to impossible to kill with a bow or a blade. And that was not a small thing, in a country where the main threat was a horse archer who never came within reach of a sword. A disciplined Frankish column could absorb that kind of attack for hours and keep walking, which meant there was no straightforward way to destroy one. You could not shoot it apart, and you could not break it in a charge. Then add the horse. When heavily armored riders came together and hit a line at the same moment, they were devastating. At Montcassard, in 1177, a heavily outnumbered Frankish charge broke a far larger army in a single afternoon. To keep that capability, each knight needed 2, 3, sometimes 4 horses on campaign. Not spares in the modern sense. Working animals, all of them eating, all of them drinking constantly. And a horse is the part of the system you cannot talk to. A man can be ordered to hold on a little longer. A horse drinks, or it stops, and a knight without a horse is just a heavily loaded man walking in the dust. And, ironically, that was the trap. The package worked so well that the whole military system was built around it. An army heavily built around the horse. Nearly unkillable in a fight. But run the numbers on it. 3,000 animals, at 50 liters a day, is 150,000 liters. Every day. Not on campaign days. Every single day. In peace, in truce, in winter. A cost that arrives constantly, whether or not there is a war on. Saladin worked this out, and it shaped everything he did afterwards. He understood he never had to defeat the armor at all. An army that constantly has to drink is dangerously easy to predict. You do not need to find it, because you already know where it has to be. So his counter-strategy was, essentially, to decline. Refuse the open battle. Stay out of reach. Let them stand in the sun. Let the bill run. So how do you run a heavy, thirsty army in a country where surface water is scarce? You stop moving. You anchor yourself to the water. Through the 12th century, European builders put up an extraordinary network of stone fortresses. As the military historian Hugh Kennedy has documented, these castles sat directly over permanent springs or above enormous cisterns cut down into the bedrock. At Belvoir, at Carac, at Crac des Chevaliers, stone vaults held reserves that were constantly refilled by the winter rain, which changes the whole shape of a war. When an enemy came, you did not have to chase him out into the dry country and lose men to the sun. You walked your army inside, shut the gates, and drank. Heavily fortified, heavily supplied, and in no hurry at all. It was brilliant. It made the bill payable, and it made territory holdable. For most of a century, it worked so well that the fortresses became the whole strategy. The frontier was not a line on a map, it was a list of places that constantly had water in them, and it opened a hole underneath itself. A dangerously predictable one, because a fortress only works if there are men standing on it. And the Kingdom of Jerusalem had a permanent, grinding shortage of people. By feudal summons, the king could put on the order of 600 or 700 royal knights into the field. 600 knights to hold a frontier running from Sinai to Syria. That is a border defended by roughly the number of people in a school assembly. And here is the squeeze. Every castle you garrison is men you cannot march. Scatter those few hundred across dozens of strongpoints to guard the cisterns, and you do not have a field army anymore. You have a set of caretakers, dangerously thin on the ground, constantly tied to the map of their own wells. They had built an unassailable network of stone water towers, and then run completely out of men to stand on them. The fix had worked, and the fix had eaten the army. So the kings of Jerusalem did something nobody had done before. They rented their permanence. First, the Knights Templar, founded around 1119. Then the Hospitallers, who became a fighting force soon afterwards. Monks who were also professional soldiers, an idea Western Europe had genuinely never seen. And because they were heavily funded by estates all across Europe, they could hold garrisons out there constantly, year after year, with no lands and no families to go home to. That is the thing the kingdom could not buy any other way. An ordinary knight came east, fulfilled his vow, and went home to his fields. He had a household, a lineage, a harvest waiting. Nobody was going to spend 20 years watching a cistern in Syria for him. These men had no fields, and no reason to leave. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a bull called Omne Datum Optimum. It lifted the Templars out from under local bishops and secular lords and placed them under Rome alone. Lords who could no longer afford their frontline castles handed them over. The orders took the great fortresses, manned the walls, and held the frontier. The garrison problem was genuinely solved, and the network held for decades. And then the new flaw showed itself. If you were the king of Jerusalem, you could not simply tell the temple what to do. The master answered to Rome. Separate treasury, separate strategy, separate ideas about honor. The strongest troops in your kingdom had a different commander, in a different country, who had never seen the place. Ironically, The institution that made the frontier holdable was the one institution that could not be ordered to hold it. In May of 1187, 2 months before the disaster, the master of the temple, Gerard de Riedfort, had already used that independence to force a fight at Cresson that went badly. When the real pressure came, the command was dangerously divided. There was no single mind in charge of the defense. And that is the shape of the whole story, in one line. Every fix they built to survive the Levant made them a little less able to leave it. When an army built on a daily water bill walks away from its springs, you find out quickly who pays first. A medieval field army was not knights on horses. Out of the 15 to 20,000 men who marched out of Safuria, more than 8 in 10 were foot soldiers, archers, grooms, and people who were not there to fight at all. In the Latin East, infantry and cavalry worked as one body. The unarmored men formed a ring around the knights, using bows and spears to keep the enemy archers far enough back that they could not shoot the horses. Break the ring, and the horses die. Lose the horses, and there is no army. So the men with no horse carried the shield that kept the whole army alive. As the column ground east through the dust on the 3rd of July, in heat pushing toward 40 degrees, those men walked. They carried heavy wooden shields and long spears. They had nothing to take the weight off them, and nothing to ride when their legs went. And they were losing water faster than they could put it back. That is not a discipline problem, and it is not a courage problem. The physiology does not allow it. Above a certain rate, there is no drinking your way out. They kept going anyway, because staying with the column was the only way to live. Then, on the morning of the 4th of July, the shield broke, pushed past the limit by thirst. Thousands of foot soldiers left the line, ignored their officers, and climbed the rocky slopes of the Horns of Hatton, looking for shade or water or anything at all. When the infantry went, the screen went with them. The horses stood exposed to the arrows. And the system that had made these men unbeatable for 2 centuries came apart in a single morning. What happened at Hatton was not an army marching into an empty desert. It was the sound of a door closing behind it. On the 3rd of July, the army chose to leave the abundant springs of Safuria and relieve the town of Tiberias, where Raymond of Tripoli's wife was under siege. Partisan accounts written afterwards describe a bitter argument in the king's tent that night. Raymond urged him to stay beside the water. Gerard de Riedfort pressed him to march. The king wavered, reversed himself, and gave the order to move. Every man who wrote those accounts down was busy blaming somebody else, and it is worth holding on to that when you read them. They marched at dawn, heavily harassed from the first hour by Saladin's skirmishers. Not a battle, just constant pressure, arrows from the flanks, men closing and pulling back, all morning, in the heat, with a dangerously strung-out column that could not move fast and could not stop. By the middle of the day, they reached the springs of Turan. The flow was nothing like enough for thousands of parched men and animals. So they made a decision. They pressed on east, dangerously short of water, believing they could reach the lake by nightfall. The moment the column cleared Turan, Saladin's fast wings swept in behind them and took the springs. The door was shut. The water at Safuria was hours behind them. The water at Turan was now behind an enemy. If you were in that column, nobody would have had to explain the situation to you. Trapped on dry ground as the light went, the army camped near the twin crags of the Horns of Hatton. No spring. Nothing. Then Saladin's men set fire to the dry grass upwind of the camp. All night the smoke came across them constantly. Thousands of men who had already been walking for a day in 40 degrees now spent the dark hours breathing it, unable to move and unable to drink, listening to an enemy who was in no rush at all. On the morning of the 4th of July, surrounded, the army made repeated attempts to break out. Men who had been constantly under arrow fire for a day and a night, in armor, without water, tried to force a way through to the lake. They all failed. The field army was destroyed. King Guy was taken. The true cross was lost. The captured brothers of the orders were executed. In 2 days, they lost the army. In 3 months, Jerusalem. And they would spend the next 100 years holding a coastline instead of a kingdom. Looking back at the ruin of 1187, it is easy to see only the failure. But if you stand back, the things they worked out in those 2 centuries did not go into the sand with the kingdom. What they had learned about moving men and animals through heat, how to stage it, when to travel, what it costs constantly and unavoidably went home in the heads of the people who survived it. And along the coastal plain, the Crusader states had built something else. Intensive, well-organized sugarcane plantations and stone mills to process the crop. Charles Verlinden argued that the administrative structures worked out on those Levantine sugar estates provided an institutional blueprint for later Mediterranean sugar production, and eventually for the Atlantic. Other scholars push back hard and argue the Atlantic systems grew on their own, under their own pressures. The argument is still live, and it is one of the more uncomfortable ones in economic history. Meanwhile, to get money from Western Europe out to those desert fortresses, the Templars built something strange. A man could hand over coin in Paris or London and draw local currency in acre. A credit network, invented to pay a water bill 2,000 miles away. The kingdom in the desert fell. The machinery built to keep it alive outlived it. Now sit back and listen for a second to the hum of the air conditioning behind you. Take a sip from that cold glass of water. It feels completely ordinary, like something that will simply be there whenever you reach for it. But after 2 centuries of iron and stone and dust, there is something uncomfortable to notice about the way people solve problems. Those knights did not lose an empire because they were fools, and not because their armor failed. They lost it because every brilliant fix they built to hold off a climate locked them a little tighter into a system they could not carry. And ironically, the lesson of the Levant is the quietest one available. Every fix we build to survive an environment makes us a little less able to leave it. We built a world where temperature is a dial on a wall, and water arrives through a pipe on demand. We turned the friction of the planet into background noise. We did not remove the cost. We hid the pipes under the floor and hoped the spring would never run dry. They are running constantly right now, underneath you, and you have never once had to think about them. Honestly, the part that stays with me isn't the fortresses or the mail. It's the glass of water on your desk. If you want to keep digging into how ordinary people survived the impossible, stay with us.